Olin family origins. Where did we come from? Immigrants of old oftentimes came up with overblown ancestries. You're wondering, why would they do such a thing? There are lots of reasons, but if you think about it, what a great opportunity to wipe the slate clean. They may have had shady origins, or were trying to escape political, religious, or ethnic persecution. Or maybe they just wanted to embellish their history a little to sound more impressive and improve their chances for success. There are so many variations, but the common theme appears to be a 14-year-old boy named John, who may have been called Llewellyn when he arrived in America in 1678. This makes his birth year about 1664. As far as his physical appearance, he has been described as both tall and of medium stature, well-proportioned and red-haired. So are we Welsh? There is no proof that John was ever named Llewellyn or that he came from Wales. The story that he was descended from Llewellyn the Great could very well be true, though Llewellyn lived from 1172 to 1204, which is almost 500 years before John Olin's birth. It would be remarkable if that oral history had been passed down through the centuries. Llewellyn's only legitimate son was Dafydd, and he died without heir. His illegitimate half-brother, Gruffydd, did have 4 sons, and one of them succeeded Dafydd. The history is full of illegitimate children. Did you know that in colonial times, any foreigner that came to America was called a Welshman? Here are the many tales of John's origins, which were compiled by Stephen Olin in 1920. C.C. Olin's book states, John Olin became a citizen of this country by compulsion. He was arrested on the coast of Wales in 1678 and forced to board a British man-of-war and was landed in Boston Harbor, where he deserted at the first opportunity and migrated to Rhode Island when he was only 14 years old. Another account. The Vermont Historical Gazetteer records the following. John Olin, the first of the name in America, settled in East Greenwich, Rhode Island in 1678. From the genealogical record, James Edmonds and his wife Cordelia Spear, about the year 1690, John Olin, aged 14, was pressed on board a man-of-war on the coast of Wales. He deserted at Boston, married at Greenwich, Rhode Island, and had 1 daughter and 3 sons, John, Henry, and Joseph. John Olin came over as a cabin boy in 1690 and deserted at Providence, Rhode Island, being 14 years old. From the Gideon Olin family, the first one of the family in this country was a boy of Welsh birth who filled the responsible position of powder monkey on board a man-of-war. He deserted at Providence, ran off into the woods, and changed his name from Llewellyn to Olin. From Henry Olin family. John Olin, the first of the name to arrive in this country, was a Welsh boy who had been pressed on board a British war vessel. On the arrival of the vessel in Boston Harbor, he was permitted to stroll upon the streets, where he observed a man driving a yoke of oxen hitched to a cart. And never having seen such a strange sight before, he begged permission, which was readily granted, to ride in this odd conveyance. For some unexplained reason, his ride into the country was so prolonged that when he did return, his vessel had sailed away without him. And finally, from Savage's Genealogical Dictionary of New England, John Olin, West Greenwich, said to have come in 1678 in his youth from Wales, with no source stated. They also say there were 4 Olins who came over from Wales. Did John settle with the Narragansett Indians? Some branches claim that when Llewellyn jumped ship, he went to live with the Narragansett Indians. The Narragansett Indians' tribal home is Rhode Island. During the time that John arrived, the Narragansetts were having increasingly violent skirmishes with the white settlers as their lands were being taken over. This is an unlikely scenario for the welcoming of a white settler to their village. Are we Swedish? Well, Orrin Raber states that the name Olin originated in Sweden, and that the town of Olinville in Normandy, France, was settled by people from Scandinavia. He also notes that his description resembles that of a Swede, not a Welshman. He also believed that John was a sailor, indicating a Scandinavian heritage, and that this would also explain his presence on the coast of Wales. Are we French? From Warren Olin, the Olin name originated in France in 1200. The Olin families lived in Normandy, just east of the Seine River, near the city of Rouen. The Spencer family originated a few miles north of Rouen in the year 900. The Spencers arrived in England about 1200. Apparently, some of the Olins escaped France by crossing the English Channel, reaching the shore of England, and being allowed to live in a specific area north of London City. Olin family tradition states that John Olin knew his wife's Spencer family back in Bedford, England, and Olin families existed in that area in the 16th and 17th centuries. Warren believes that our ancestor John Olin was born in England, and his ancestors originated in France. John was said to be acquainted with the Spencer family back in England. Spencer is a French name, de Spencer. So what about the DNA? Well, in 2009, the Olin Family Society funded a DNA project with 2 purposes. Primarily, the goal was to discover where the Olins came from, but also to help settle the question of disputed lines. The DNA report showed that we are part of the haplogroup R1b. This makes sense as the Ice Age forced our ancestors into Spain, Italy, and the Balkans. R1b shows up with the most frequency in Spain and Ireland, where the incidence is 90%, while almost 70% of men in southern England are R1b. In conclusion, there appears to be no doubt that John Olin was in Rhode Island, most likely in 1678, and that he married Susanna Spencer. He definitely could have been rambling about Wales when pressed on board ship, or taken from another ship. The Welsh reference only appears much later in C.C. Olin's book. The Welshmen were fishermen and were protected from impressment. John is said to have 3 sons, John, Henry, and Joseph, none of these names being Celtic. The reference to Llewellyn comes from only one branch of the family. It may have been a way to explain the problem with the non-Welsh names. Stephen Olin originally thought that the Olins were possibly Huguenot and driven out of France, but the name was not found in Huguenot records. The names of John's sons, however, are on the French calendar of saints and legal for christening. While visiting Belgium in 1883, Stephen had the opportunity to meet Monsieur Xavier Olin, who explained that there were few, if any, Olins left in Europe. However, in the 16th and 17th century there were. In correspondence, King Henry IV even noted his special reliance on Sieur de Olinville. There is much to read about in Stephen's research. It is very romantic and factual and well worth the read. Of the 4 names that John gave his sons, John, Henry, and Joseph, all are found in the French pedigree. On conclusion, he states, a Catholic Frenchman could look for no welcome in New England. The widest toleration which anywhere prevailed made exception of Roman Catholics. Frenchmen were the enemies again, whom the colonies were fighting in expeditions. If John was a Frenchman, then Stephen says that it completely explains our ignorance of his boyhood. A runaway Welsh boy would have no reason to hide or conceal his origin. However, a French papist would have been a fool not to disappear into the woods and then come out with a new identity. Add in his marriage to Susanna Spencer and her family's French origins, and it makes sense. Even Orrin Raber's note on the origin of the Olin name makes sense. So, from the information that we have, and thanks to Stephen Olin's research, the most likely scenario is that the Olin name did come from Sweden, and those Swedes migrated to Normandy, France. At some point, the Olins migrated out of France and into southern England. From there, it's possible John Olin was pressed on board a ship, migrated to America, and began a well-populated, sturdy, and successful group of Americans of which we can all be proud. So what do you think?